the purpose behind this is to just focus a little bit on working with news media in your area, your country, wherever you may be. I'll give you a little bit of my background on this. I've worked both sides of this. I worked in newspapers here in the US for 10 years, and then I taught journalism at university for 17 years. So I have quite a bit of experience with not only being the news media, but then later working with the news media as part of the seed company and then Wycliffe. And so there's quite a lot of things to be gained by having good relationships with news media. So just a couple of how and why here. The objective here is going to be to help ministry leaders and communicators, that's us, understand how to foster trust, clarity, and mutual respect with journalists. And the reasons are, one, so that our stories about our work are reported accurately and compellingly. And then the second one is so that we reflect Christ to journalists and through them to our communities. And third, just to glorify God with these stories. So those are some very basic reasons, but I think sometimes that can get lost. And so it's good to kind of remind ourselves of that. I want to first just quickly talk about journalists today, and it's not a friendly environment for journalists in most parts of the world right now, including where I live in the US. There's quite a lot of threats against journalists. There's a lot of hatred toward journalists, largely because they report the truth, I think, but and certainly there are issues with media bias and those sorts of things, and that has always been an issue. But I just wanted to point out that as you're dealing with news reporters, news editors, they're facing some pressures that maybe they've never had to face before. I'll show you a quick map too. This is the state of world press freedom, and it's put together by Reporters Without Borders. And I'll zoom in on this a little bit, but you can see there aren't a whole lot of good situations reported, and there are quite a lot of serious problems around the world with the state of free press. And again, just so you're kind of aware of what journalists are up against, and they're working in kind of hostile environments in a whole lot of places around the world. Now, you'll also notice that one particular country ranks the very highest in this little survey, and that's Norway. So we happen to have some Norway people with us this morning and or this afternoon, whatever the case may be. And so I wanted to start. I'm going to stop sharing my screen in just a second here, but we have Agnes Lead, who's the director of Wycliffe Norway and also the Global Alliance board chair. And they had a very good experience with sharing some stories with Christian media in Norway. So I'm going to stop sharing so that we can see Agnes. And yeah, there she is. And if you want to just tell us a little bit about what you guys tried, Agnes, and how it went, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, so I've been director for 12 years in Norway, and in Norway we have, of course, the press. We have regional newspapers, we have national newspapers, or we have, of course, broadcasting companies, so on. Among all that, we have two well-known Christian newspapers and at least two more less known or more limited Christian news outlets. And so primarily, it would be Christian newspapers interested in what we're doing. Unless they could, of course, somebody else could dig in something they consider a scandal or something else juicy. So what happens is that throughout these years, from time to time, I'm contacted either by email or even a phone call to the office or to me that they're doing, a journalist, for instance, investigating a certain situation or a specific topic, and they want me to answer a few questions. And so in those situations, I always try to be friendly and willing to contribute. And so the deal is, of course, that in Norway, at least, you have the right to see the quotes before it's printed, like how I am quoted, but I don't have the right to see the whole article. So until the whole article comes, I don't know who else are being asked the same question as me, other mission leaders maybe, or what is the critical angle or whatever. But I have the right to check. So I ask them, they send back maybe portions or parts, what they wrote out of the interview, and I can correct factual mistakes or saying, no, that was a misunderstanding or that fact is not, and that works okay. I'm always a little bit nervous if I get those kind of phone calls. I have had maybe in my time only one that was a bit tricky, where they were going into some very critical questions about Bible translation in the Amazon and among indigenous people. And in that situation, I said to the journalists that, yes, Wycliffe, we're part of a large global network of organizations. Wycliffe Norway has never had anything in the Amazon. So if I am to answer anything there, you have to give me a few hours to research. So I was given, I don't know, only one day or something, but that I could get some more information. So, but never being negative or hostile. That's kind of what I'm trying. And so far, I'm thankful that I haven't had really hostile media. Could be some of the national or left wing or larger newspapers really want to get into tricky questions. That because we have viewpoints that the general secular society may not approve of, So I'm kind of thankful as long as I'm not that. Okay, so when it comes to the Christian media, we would love to have articles regularly, but it's a question of, if I'm asked, I always respond, but who has the self-discipline to set aside time in everything else and produce an article? It's just that putting in ads is quite costly. We do a little bit of advertising every year just to have at least an annual visibility in terms of branding, but we don't have the economy, the finances, and it doesn't really pay off in any way, doesn't really give a lot of new donors or anything, but sometimes we do a little bit of advertising. But if you write an article and they are willing to take it, it's free, right? So if I could produce articles, and that's been kind of on my wish I could do list for many years, but again, other things, the urgencies, whatever is more easy, I do. So, but I do write. I write, for instance, we have a quarterly magazine, usually quarterly. This year we have 3 editions, the Wycliffe News, it's called, that we have subscribers. We send, Elizabeth is the one who collects the stories, try to cover, during the year, we cover our different projects and where we have staff and keeping our donors and other interested people informed. So I think, well, Norway is a small population, we're 5.5, the whole country. It's just half of, I don't know, not even half of London or New York, I think. But it just means we have about 2,500 subscribers. Only maybe 25 or 30% of them are donors, but they're potential donors. Or they may be praying and so on. So I always write an editorial. And this year I thought this is the Vision 2025 end year. So let's have all my editorials focus on Vision 2025, because there's lots you can write about that, and there's lots going on. And I want at the end of the year, I hope many people have heard the wonderful, how statistics can be made into wonderful stories, that God's really at work and so much is happening and lots to celebrate. So at the time when I wrote that 3rd editorial in September, I all of a sudden thought of an idea. What if I feed these 3 editorials? They're each about 750 words, I think. Is that right, Elizabeth? Around there, to fit the magazine. If I feed them into ChatGPT and I ask, can you produce 1 article You know, a newspaper article that would be around, I think I said around 900 words. I had heard somebody say that that's kind of the length you should aim for if you want them to take it. So ChatGPT produced an article for me. I went through it, and you know, you want to prioritize differently and edit it, but I didn't edit very much. I was quite pleased. And I sent it to, out of these two newspapers, the one that is, as far as we know, the group of subscribers, the demography would be like the Bible is really, you know, it's their heart. They're very friendly audience. The other one might have a little bit more critical audience. They're Christians, but they are more on the liberal side, at least. Some of them are more on the liberal side, may not be as enthusiastic about mission or the Bible, but still, many of our donors are there as well. But I wrote for this one. So I sent it off. They said, yes, we'd love to use it, but could you shorten it a little bit? I said, yes. And I want to do that shortening. I don't want them to do it. So I cut out some, you know, of the things like small quotes and, you know, you just cut down to, I don't remember, down to 750 maybe. And then I sent it and it was printed and they asked for some pictures. We gave them pictures. As soon as that was published, I got a phone call from another, a bit smaller Christian news outlet. They're only digital. And they said, can we use the same text? I said, is that really okay? I sent it to the first paper. They said, oh, nowadays that's fine. We can put a note that, you know. And so I sent him both the longer and the shorter version. He chose the longer version and put that. And then I was called a Christian television channel, TV channel called me. And they said, this is it was a great article, great to read this. We want to put that in our evening news program. I want to come and interview you. So the journalist shows up in my office. And I answer questions and she asks more about, you know, all kinds of things related to Bible translation. And she takes pictures in my office, some of the bookshelves, some of the Bibles, you know. And of course, in that case, I don't know what it is like until I see it on TV, you know. So I usually don't watch Christian TV, so I have to look up the channel, find it. But it's also available then on just their webpage afterwards. So I thought that was not very much work, and it gave me a lot of branding and spreading our information beyond our subscribers. And then now, since then, again, the daily and weekly busyness catches up with me, but I've been thinking I want to do the same for that other large Christian newspaper. Maybe I'll try to do it in December because we're going to have a few ads in. We made deal with them. We'll have a few ads in December. December is our best donor month. Maybe the same in other countries, but it's usually like a double month in terms of our gifts. People give more in December. They look through what they've given through the year and they, you know, top it up. And so I'm thinking for that other Christian newspaper, if I can have a kind of more of a problem solving angle or something like trying to answer a critical question. I'm just, you know, this is mulling in the back of my mind, but I'm definitely going to try similar things. And since I've written 4 editorials a year for 12 years, I could even go back and look up at some of them or things I've written for other, and sometimes asked to write for other magazines on specific topics. I can look at that again. So the point is reuse good texts. Reuse what you've written before. And that's advice I've been given also by a communication expert who now happens to be our board chair, but this is many years ago. He just said, reuse your good texts. Reuse your good donor letters. Just reuse it. Change a little bit. It's same message, but you know, the best donor letters, just recycle them because people are not going to remember that they read exactly that. So that's really, I think, all I had to share. Very simple, but it worked. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great.
If you have questions, you decide, Jim, if there's time. for questions, but
Yeah, I know Agnes has to leave in a couple of minutes here, but if anyone has a question for Agnes, go ahead, and then we'll jump back into some more things after that. It was interesting to me that you used ChatGPT to produce it. Were there hesitations on that, and did you have to change much?
no, I didn't have to change much. And I thought to myself that when I have written those 3 articles, even if I haven't, but I have written those 3 articles. I feed them in, I said, and in them there were some repetition and some new themes. Create one article this length, and then I think that's mine. And I look over it and I see it's my writing style. It's I don't want. I'm quite picky about certain phrases or grammar things or how I like it if I have my name on it. And so I think that was fine. So I didn't hesitate. I think that's to me that's not artificial. It's just getting help.
Yeah, it's a really useful tool.
As some of you know, I sent it to the Europe area director. I said, if you want to, you could send this to the directors because nowadays it's so easy to translate.
Hmm.
And it doesn't have to be, they can translate it and they can rewrite it if this can inspire and help them. It's not like I consider this my intellectual property, just Wycliffe.
Yeah.
It's just Wycliffe talk.
I have a question. So, how are Christians, evangelical Christians, generally counted in Norway? Like in Germany, it's like, oh, we have the Christfluencer. They are very radical. They are very like the Tredwife style. So people are going to churches and oh, it's like a sect. So, they are preaching, they are only men and women, no sex before marriage, but it's really I think like from the left wing looked in the media. I mean, we have a good reputation in our communities and in the Christian media, but how is it in your country? So does it count on? Because you only talked about the Christian paper.
That's true. And we have similar, it's a very secular society, and the mainstream media and the mainstream culture is secular. They are it's quite woke. There is growing intolerance for many of our viewpoints, especially in identity politics and some other things. But that's why I haven't tried to write this kind of article for the general media. It probably would be refused. They're not really interested. And I also know, like I said, that other large Christian newspaper where I say they may want to have more critical angle. It's not because they're critical to what we're doing, but I know one of the journalists there, he said, we're not a church bulletin. We're newspaper. And that's our job is to have, all the time, looking at things also with critical questions. Doesn't mean they're against us. They may be very much for us, but they want things to, be evaluated and judged. So I think that's fine. But I don't think these papers have a very large audience outside of the Christian circles. One of them might, because there are other, they might for some reasons, both of them, and there could be family members.
Another thing that struck me, Agnes, was how other media noticed it and then wanted it. And there there is such a need for content in both Christian and secular media because staffs have gotten so small and they still need content. And so it's actually a little bit easier today to get something in print than it might have been 20, 30 years ago, just because there's so few journalists working now and they need things to put in those papers and those magazines. So yeah, for those of you in other places, it's potentially a good opportunity to get your voice heard where it might not have been before. So there's two sides to those issues.
And then I also think we have to be prepared to be refused, and then you try again. Because maybe your next article has an angle or a topic or an emphasis that, and maybe, we can try to be alert to what's, trends or what's preoccupying people or among Christians now. But I find that among Christians, there's great interest in Bible translation, and to hear about, the time and day we live in now, that so much is happening, and it's happening in our time. We get to see it. Makes people excited. So makes me excited. So then.
Well, Agnes, thanks so much for being part of this. We appreciate hearing what you guys have done, and that's a good example for the rest of us. So we will move on. Here are some reasons why this matters. There's public trust. News outlets shape public perception far beyond our organization's own channels, and so you have an opportunity for a wider audience with that. Kingdom impact is the second one. Thoughtful engagement helps ensure that faith-based perspectives are represented fairly. And there again, Agnes mentioned this too. It may be a point of view that hasn't previously come to light in especially a secular publication. And you may get refused, but you may also be welcomed. So take that chance. And then the last one, mutual mission. Both ministries and journalists ultimately serve the public good. So truth, transparency, human stories, and as we'll get to in a minute here, stories are always welcome if they fit journalistic criteria usually. So this is just a quick example from where I live. This is a mission organization called Kids Around the World. They build playgrounds in war-torn areas or impoverished areas around the world, and they also have some scripture engagement tools and things like that. And what they did, they're based here in Rockford, Illinois, where I live. At least a couple of times they have welcomed reporters, news reporters from the local newspaper on those trips. And they got wonderful publicity through that. And in fact, one of the times I was the reporter, so I know that it went great. There was just a kind of a narrative of this playground project and the people they were serving. Mine was in Haiti after the earthquake a few years ago. And it's just an example of how working with local media and involving them in a project, and for Bible translation, it might even be after you've established some trusting relationship with a reporter somewhere, maybe you invite them on a trip or invite them to a dedication or something, and something good could happen from that. So one quick example. Again, I'm back to just understanding what journalists are up against. It's tight deadlines, shrinking staff, and they have to write with brevity and clarity. And editors want human interest angles and verifiable facts, not just promotional copy. And that's kind of a hard bridge to cross sometimes for us because in organizations like ours, we're used to writing promotional copy. We'll talk a bit here about some of the differences of that. And then journalists are trying to look for all sides of a story. They value honesty and access over polish. So let's talk about here, treat journalists as professionals doing their jobs, not as adversaries or mouthpieces. That would go a long way toward good relationships, I think, because so many people approach the media either as enemies or as someone who is only going to put across their point of view, and that's not a journalist's job. A media ready mindset for your organization. There's some things here that you can do to kind of, as Agnes mentioned, being ready for when those situations come up that you might be relating to news media. Designate a trusted spokesperson trained for interviews. So someone in your organization should be the person who does those. Now, maybe there's a specific topic where there's a specific person involved. Let's say it's sign language translation. You may need your main sign language person for that. But generally, it's going to be someone, if not your president or director, it may be your communication person, but someone who's a trusted spokesperson and is good at speaking publicly. And then you can practice responding to tough questions and avoiding defensiveness. So if something's come up or there's an issue in your culture where tough questions are coming up, you can sort of anticipate what some of those might be and practice a little bit. There's three terms here that are really good to know as you're dealing with the news media, and that's off the record, embargo, and background. Um, when you go off the record with a reporter, that means that nothing you say can be used. It's basically between you and the reporter, and there's an understanding. And again, this is going to vary by country, so be sure that your country's laws are similar to what ours are here in the U.S. But I think a lot of this is fairly universal. So off the record means they can't use it. It's for their information only. Embargo means that they can use the information, they can quote you on it, but there's a date that it's allowed to be used. So a lot of times, for instance, with a press release, you'll send a press release, which I'll talk about in a minute, and it'll say embargoed for 1 December, 5 p.m. or something. And that means they can use it after that. So if you see that word embargo, that's what that's about. There's a certain time that they're allowed to use it. And then background, that third term, that's something where if you're talking to a journalist and you want to give them some information, but it can't officially come from you, then you can say you can use this, but you can't quote me. And you can say a source in the organization, or background could just be this is for you to know, but again, I can't be quoted on it. So a little bit of difference with off the record where they can't use it at all. Background, they can use it, they just can't quote you. And then prepare clear messages, clear key messages grounded in truth, compassion, and transparency. And I'm going to talk in a second about a white paper document and how that can help with that aspect. And then one little tip at the bottom here, host media Q&A drills internally once or twice a year. You can just sort of have a pretend situation where something has either something good has happened, something bad has happened. How would you react if you start getting calls from news media? So it's a good practice. Now, the white paper document, and I'm going to give you some tips here that come from a book from a friend of mine named Rob Martin. The book is When Money Goes on Mission. So I wanted to give credit where credit is due there, but Rob has some good information about creating a white paper document. And what that is, it's this internal document with information about your organization, who you are, what you do, what you've done, what you hope to do, and why. This can be used to create, say, press releases or statements, and this could be used for investors or prospective members, and certainly news media. And this document can be a place to keep and store frequently used phrasing and terminology that you may use in your organization. And so you create this thing and it kind of becomes the source document for a lot of the stuff we're talking about. If you need to be able to quickly tell what your organization does or what your part of the organization does. And so some of those key questions, what's God showing us? What's he telling us to do about it? How will we know when we are accomplishing this calling? Again, those are internal. Those are facing you and your organization, but it helps everybody kind of know what you're about. And then we'll go on a little bit, some elements of a white paper. Your values, like with the Alliance, its purpose, mission, values, you'd want those to be included. If you have some operating principles, your track record of success, key and up-to-date statistics, just key and distinct strategies, vision, a lot of these kind of overlap. Your organization's history, it's a good place to store some key things about that. And then your definitions of key terms, phrases, and issues. So for example, we talk a lot about transformation in Bible translation. Well, what do we mean by that? That can mean different things to someone who's not accustomed to working with these terms every day. Or what is a consultant? That's a very different definition in Bible translation than in other walks of life. So it's good to kind of have some of those definitions written down. Some things just about creating and maintaining a white paper. Keep it as a Google Doc or something similar. It's a living document and it's something you're going to want to be updating a lot. And your latest version of this should always be easy to find. So I do this we have a local rescue mission that works with homeless people that I work with, and I created a white paper for them. It's just a Google Doc. And if you're not sure where to start, you can Google white paper template, which is the picture on the screen there. And there's lots of different starting points that will help you create this. And then the next point there is control access to it. Designate a keeper. Probably that's your communication person again. And in a larger organization, it may just be the president or the director in smaller organizations. For most, they just need to know where to find it, but it should be read only. You don't want everybody updating this. You want some control over what's getting put into this. And then anyone in your organization who speaks or writes to news media should know the white paper document really well and review it or update it at least once a year. So that's just an aside, I guess. But if you create this little document that has a lot of this stuff, then particularly when you're writing messaging, you may have a paragraph that you keep that really tells what you're about and is a good way to explain it to a journalist. That's where you might keep that. And then you've always got access to it. And again, history, definitions, things like that. So it's a good practice to do that. Um, Building relationships with journalists here before you need them. And these are some tips that I think everybody could try. Know local religion and community reporters by name, and that may be national in your case too. But if someone is assigned to that beat, and by beat that's the area that they cover, the subject that they cover, it's a good idea for you to know who those people are and to meet them. Send them thoughtful story tips, not just promotion. We'll get to that in a second. Invite them to visit your facility or event. That's like, going on the trip with the playground build. No strings attached. They can report on it. They don't have to, but it's just a way for them to get to know you in a positive light. Express appreciation when they cover stories accurately. That may be your story, and it may be another one that you think they did a really good job with. And then offer expert sources on certain topics that may arise. I think Agnes hinted at that she's offered herself as an expert on certain things, and our organizations are certainly expert on some linguistic matters or evangelism and things like that. And again, you're building these relationships so that it's not adversarial. It's a almost a partnership. You're building bridges and not barricades with media. I will say too, um, journalists generally are not going to be adversaries. They don't approach it that way. They are Journalists are some of the best people I know, and they're really looking for stories. And if you can help them with that, and if they know you're not crazy, then that's a really good starting point. This is offering stories that journalists can use, and so there are certain parts of what we do that make news stories, and there are other parts that probably don't. There's some types of press releases I mentioned here, the product launch, an event press release, a milestone, which could be, like a 40th anniversary or something, promotion of a leader or executive, partnership or collaboration, financial results, community involvement, rebranding, relocation. Those are just some topics that might make stories that someone's going to be interested in. When you do pitch a story, there's several ways to do that. One is with a personal email, text, or phone call. That's the most personal and probably gets the best results. Excuse me, I'm going to take a drink of coffee. So just the one-to-one personal contact is very useful and helpful. And you can email a press release. That's basically a one-page news announcement or story. Or you can send a targeted press release that's tailored for a specific news organization or publication. The general press release is just for anybody. And so those are ways that you can get news stories out to news media. Let's talk a little more about that. Stories that journalists can use. Definition of news, the simplest one I've ever seen. This was an old newspaper editor I used to have. Timely, important, interesting. If something has those three factors, it's probably news. The next thing, they're focused on people and not programs. So it's not that, we are translating the book of Ruth for a certain people group, but what's changing in someone's life because of the work we're doing. And if you can show that through the eyes of a person living that story, that's a really effective way to get a story, to get a reporter interested in a story. Provide specific sources and potential angles. So again, you'd need permission on this, obviously, but if you can direct a reporter to sources on the ground someplace who would be able to talk about this story, then that's really helpful to them. Strong visuals. Agnes mentioned providing photos. You can do charts, you can do video. Anything like that that you can offer makes the journalist's jobs that much easier. So it's a good practice to have something available when you're pitching a story. If you're going to send quotes that someone might use in a story, they should sound human and not corporate, and just have it be in normal speaking voice and not clearly dressed up. You can also offer interviews so the reporter can gather his or her own quotes. But then I say this isn't as helpful as it once was because there just aren't as many reporters. I mentioned this earlier. And so sometimes the prepackaged story can be really embraced because it's something someone can do in a hurry. And then offer background data or context that reporters can verify and save them time by saying where you got the information. So you're just helping them do their job well. And that's not only in your best interest, but it also shows that you care about the people you're dealing with. And I think that's a Christ-like attribute. So it's a good thing to do. I mentioned before, people, not programs. So an example would be, don't just say only 550 remaining languages need Bible translation to begin. That's significant, obviously, but something that's going to interest a journalist more would be show one person whom your work has served and maybe who exemplifies why you do what you do and tell that person's story and show how it intersects with your organization's. How's their life changed? Let your audience form an emotional connection, not only with the person, but with the story's universal, relatable theme. Now, that goes for the stories we create for our own organizations too, but it's particularly important when we're pitching a story to outside organizations. There's a link there that obviously you can't click on yet, but it's on our communication resources page, and it's a document called The Power of One, and it just goes into that detail about why it's so much more effective to show one person and how it affects them versus showing a country or a community and trying to show the impact that way. Um, Agnes talked a little bit about working with secular and Christian media outlets. I want to give you some tips for each. For secular media, you're emphasizing community relevance, transparency, social impact. So it's not necessarily evangelism that you're emphasizing because that's going to be of secondary importance to a secular outlet. But some of these other things, particularly community, is huge. And so you can kind of angle a story a little bit depending on who you're pitching it to. You really want to avoid Christianese or inside jargon. So instead of saying mission trip, you might say international volunteer projects. Don't say shared, like so and so shared this with us. Say said. Uh, and helping people deepen their faith rather than saying making disciples. So just kind of recognizing where we have phrasing and words that we use all the time, but it may not be well known outside of the Christian community. And when you're working with secular media, you're talking to a general population. So kind of translating that Christianese. Um, Podcasts are another place where you can certainly get an audience. And I just say know it well before you say yes, because there are so many people doing podcasts. We do a couple with the Alliance, in fact. But there are so many people who are not trained journalists or not trained interviewers doing podcasts, and sometimes they have an agenda and sometimes they don't. But you want to know who that person is and be sure you're not setting yourself up to be trapped or to be made to look bad or to serve an agenda that isn't yours. So certainly go on podcasts if you get a chance, but know before you say yes who they are. And then I've mentioned this a little bit before, but don't create an enemy that isn't there by assuming you and your story will receive a hostile reception. Remember, a lot of journalists are also Christians, and that differs according to your context, but I would say in most cases that's true. Okay, Christian media, working with Christian media outlets. Here you can go deeper into the faith motivation, discipleship outcomes, theological roots, because you've got an audience that's going to understand that a little better. You still want to practice journalistic discipline, so facts first and then faith second, or kind of the emotional side of things second. So you still want to be giving them facts and things, tools that journalists can use. Don't assume because the media outlet is Christian that it means the journalism will be good or fair. Again, you've got different levels of training going on. Some of it's good, some of it's not very good. And so you do still need to keep your guard up a little bit, even when working with Christian media, because you just don't know how well they know their job. Sometimes it may be great, but don't assume that going in. And then the same thing about podcasts. Know it well before you say yes to being interviewed on a podcast, even a Christian one. Uh, when things go wrong, and we have a whole set of training on this that I'll mention here in a second, but don't go dark. If something bad happens in your organization, let's say there's kidnapping or something that happens, which has come up in the past. If you don't say anything, it's going to raise suspicion with good journalists because they are trying to find out what's happening. And if someone is not being forthright with them, they realize that. And then it looks like you're hiding something. So respond promptly and calmly. Acknowledge what you can, but don't speculate. So even if your response is, "Hey, I understand you're looking for this. I don't know yet. I would be glad to talk to you when I do." Those kinds of answers are much better than just saying no comment or not returning a call or an email. So keeping good relationships and just again, you're working together on some things, including that sort of a situation. And then remember that reputation is built long before a crisis. Um, that goes back to having those good relationships with journalists who might be covering you when something does go wrong. A little bit more about when things go wrong. I'm not going to hit all these because we've hit some of them already. Have your facts, visuals, and your spokesperson ready before something goes to public view. That would be, again, back to that white paper document. Have those things ready for whoever is going to be talking with news media so that they have some talking points in front of them. When you don't engage the media or only respond defensively, the story gets framed by others, sometimes negatively. So again, being proactive can help. Yeah, some of these others I've already mentioned, so I'm going to move along here. We're almost to the end. Practical next steps. And here are some things that any organization could do. First is audit your ministry's public presence, your website, your bios. If you have a media kit, that would be similar to the white paper, but something that you would actually give to media. Is everything accurate and up to date? Do you have all those vision statements, mission statements, list of key officers, things like that, all up to date? The second one there, if you don't already have one, create a white paper. The next one is create a contact list of reporters and editors from local and national media, both Christian and secular. And then what I don't say here is move through that list then. Get a cup of coffee with them or something, or at least get to know people so that they know you and they know you're a credible person and a nice person and someone they might like to deal with. Establish media policies, who speaks, how quickly you respond, those sorts of things. That's a good thing to know. And that feeds into that next one. Watch our Alliance videos on crisis response planning, and that's under communication and resources, our page. But there's some videos on how you can prepare your organization for any sort of crisis communications. But it's good practice on lots of things as well. So those would be my tips. And there's my email if you want. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. Anybody have a question on any of this or a comment, or have you had experience dealing with news media? Yeah, Joe.
Agnes was saying that she wanted to try for another article next month. Are there specific times of the year where news media is more receptive to speculative articles or contacts?
Yeah, it's going to depend on the outlet, I guess. And sometimes if it's like a quarterly magazine, you want to be thinking 2 or 3 quarters in advance. So you would not send them a Christmas article next week. You should have sent that 3 months ago. So, there's that sort of approach. Um, a lot of times for news media, it's topical and it's related to something going on in the culture. So if you're kind of just keeping a pulse of that, and then again, knowing what their deadlines might be and knowing if this is a weekly newspaper, then yeah, you could be closer in date. A Christmas article still might be okay right now. If it's a quarterly thing, then you've missed that boat. So that's a lot of it is just timing.
And are there times of years where they're just going to be more there's less happening, so they're more interested in copy?
It's going to depend on place, I think. For instance, in a lot of the world, summer is a time that people are off, and so there may be less story available because the reporters aren't working or something, and so that might be a time when you'd have a better chance to get something published. So if you know there's been that season, or if around the holidays people are off for a while, so maybe right after that there could be opportunity. But that's a question you would ask probably someone who works at a publication you want to get published in, and just say, what are the best times? And then you're kind of again working together with that person, and you kind of have this little partnership going even on little things like that.
I have an additional information. I mean, there are also these day of indigenous languages or Day of the Bible, these yearly days we celebrate, like Mother's Day, Father's Day, or
Yeah.
I don't know, Day of Hug Yourself or animals. So, I mean, if you know this, you can also contact the Christians media maybe a month in advance or two if you have an article or something to say. We have a German radio player. And sometimes we have like 2 minutes interviews with people from Wycliffe, but normally they ask us because they are nearby, so we have a good relationship. So they already look in advance, hey, we want to publish something. So do you have some resources for us?
Yeah, good thoughts. If you have some kind of event coming up, commemorative thing, well, we just did the Vision 2025 celebration, for instance. So a month or two in advance of that, you could get a press release out to some people who might be interested in that. So yeah, just it's always thinking ahead a few news cycles, whatever that may be. It could be quarterly, it could be weekly, daily, whatever. But and then that's kind of how journalists have to work too. You're always thinking 2 or 3 cycles ahead. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I had another thought. So I'm not sure if Wycliffe Germany does have this white paper, uh,
Hmm.
but I know that all this information we also have on our internet page. So like if we have new members, they could just look it up online. Or when
Hmm.
new data, how many Bibles are left, just sometimes look on our internet page because other colleagues are keeping it up to date. Because sometimes I don't know how to find the internal documents and how they are named. So if you have a running internet page, you can also use this as a resource.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. Statistics, especially if you've kept up to date with those. The uh, the advantage of a white paper is it's not public facing, and so you can put talking points and things like that in there that you would not want the public to see on your website, but that you need to be able to access. So it's good to use both. But yeah, that's a good point. You can certainly use your own public information on your website. Thanks everybody for being part of this. This has been a good discussion. And Elizabeth, please again pass our thanks on to Agnes for being part. She did great, and it was really good information.